Welcome to the MYS Virtual Hangout. Here's your host, MYS Music Director, Raúl Gómez.
Good evening and welcome to the first Hangout of 2021. We couldn't have gotten a better guest. Carlos Kalmar is here. He is celebrating his 18th and final season as music director of the Oregon Symphony, and he is a great friend of the Metropolitan Youth Symphony. I had a great time chatting with him, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Maestro Carlos Kalmar, what a pleasure to have you as our guest for the MYS Virtual Hangout number 61. How are you?
I'm very well, and it's such a pleasure to see you and to know that you are safe and your family is safe. And I hope that everybody who's watching this is essentially staying put.
Yes.
And guarding your health. And I hope very much that this will be over.
Yes, we cannot wait to, of course, have rehearsals back in person and have everything go back to normal. Because one of our favorite things every year at MYS is when you come and you visit our rehearsal and you work with our students. So we all miss you.
Well, trust me, I miss that too, because I have been, like probably everybody else, I have been idle since the middle of February.
Yes.
And there is, especially here in Portland, Oregon, with my orchestra, there are a lot of things happening, but none of them actually involve an active conductor.
Sure.
And that's what I am. So I'm sitting around and thinking about programs for next seasons in other places and stuff like that. And then I'm thinking like, hey, I always loved those days when I could come to MYS, and it was always such a big deal of fun to either see how the littles are working and what kind of progress and how committed they are, and then to work with your big orchestra, tackling really important works of the symphonic repertoire and see, hey, those kids really go for it. And there are many of them who are so incredibly talented and it's another tool where I see the talent, and I also know that you have kind of good connections to the musicians of the Oregon Symphony who are tutors to your students, and that's how we all get together in this community.
Yeah, I was recently interviewing a student of MYS, a bass player, and we were talking about, conductors and rehearsals and how rehearsals can be fun. And he said that you are a great example of fun rehearsals because whenever you come and you rehearse with MYS, it's a lot of fun. And he was saying that you particularly use really fun metaphors to talk about music. And he told one specifically, and it was Mahler, Symphony number 1. I don't know which movement he's referring to, but he told me that your metaphor was eating mac and cheese.
Wow.
And it's like you're eating mac and cheese and you're getting to the bottom of the bowl and it's like the delicious part of the mac and cheese or something like that. So
I'm sure that when Mahler wrote his Symphony number 1, he was thinking about mac and cheese. I might have to add to that over the years, yes, I know that I use sometimes metaphors that just come to my mind in the moment. I never think about, okay, how could I explain what I want? It just happens then, and I blur something out, and I wish that some musician in one of my orchestras where I have a very, very long tenure actually collects them, because I think that is up for a good deal of love. Because one thing I know in terms, and that is what essentially the quote you just said about the bass player in MYS is exactly that. I do a lot of allegations to cooking.
Okay.
Food and cooking, because it just comes very natural to me. I know that there are musicians and conductors who talk and they explain colors. I mean, you know that there are people who actually see colors when they make music.
Sure.
One of them. I don't see colors. I might see some pictures, but it's not that concrete. But sometimes I feel when it comes to music, instead of just telling the orchestra that you're rehearsing with, that you're working with, instead of telling them a little more loud, a little softer and faster and whatever, you just need something that is more expressive, and you go around it and you make an analogy, and sometimes the analogy has literally nothing to do with what you're doing. The surprising thing happens quite often. You still get the job done because everybody smiles and says like, hua, 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 he just said this. And then they play kind of differently and something has happened.
I've seen it happen, not only with MYS, but also with the Oregon Symphony, and sometimes you're right, they're silly, right? But you're going for a sound, you're going for specific texture, color, and it works, and it's fun. And in my conversation with this student, when we were talking about this, I said, well, when you, as a conductor, go and you work with an orchestra, or maybe you go and you're auditioning for a job, right, as a conductor, if you can make the orchestra laugh, things are going okay, right? And if you know how to do it well, it's like it's sort of an art.
It definitely is an art, and it's a way that you have to cultivate over the years. And I can only say that the fact that I have been conducting professionally for now 35 years, and of course during 35 years, you learn one thing or two in terms of how it's being done. I vaguely remember my very first years as a music director. I was barely 29 years old when I took over my first orchestra, and I had very ambitious plans and probably very interesting ideas that I simply had no real clue how to communicate. And I probably was doing one thing back then that I try to some extent to avoid these days, which is I talked a lot.
Sure.
And that is over the time. I think what you learn is to just get a little faster to the point, and just make everybody understand what you actually want to express in one way or the other.
Sure.
And move off. Let the orchestra play as much as it is possible. And that's it's a fun thing.
Yeah. Well, of course, you're talking about during a rehearsal, like while you're rehearsing. But, part of the job really is beyond conducting, right? Because you are the face of the orchestra very often. You have to do interviews, you have to do pre-concert talks. So in a way, you also have to do a lot of talking outside of rehearsal. Have you always been comfortable in that aspect of the job?
That changed over time. When I started as a conductor, it didn't come to my mind because let's remember, I was a chief conductor or music director in Europe. Yes. And in Europe at that time, just everything that a conductor essentially does is you come to your rehearsal, you come to the concert, you bow to the audience, you turn around, do your concerts, you conduct, you don't say a word.
Sure.
Then there is applause, let's hope for that. And then you turn around, you salute the audience, and you go home. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's no contact. And I remember that one day I was, I don't even remember in which, it was very early in my third job. I think that is when it happened. I thought, my thinking went this way. I thought, well, you guys, there is technically behind me, there are 1,200 people, 2,000 people, whatever number there is in the concert hall. And I am pouring something very emotional into something that I'm doing with a wonderful group of musicians, and they are pouring their individuality, and we are getting together and making this piece sound, etc. There is a lot of emotions. And I thought, hey guys, if I open myself up to such a thing like pouring my emotions in front of all of you, even though I can't see you because you are in my back, I want to actually know who the hell are you.
Sure.
Because I thought it's only fair. So, and then I thought, what is my best way to communicate with my audience in a different way? And the first thing that I came up with is let's do pre-concert talk. So I have been doing pre-concert talk starting in either 96 or 97. around that time until this day in increasing numbers.
Yeah.
And of course, I have to point out that there is a substantial difference between being music director here in the United States as being music director in Europe. Because here it is a requirement of the job to be a part of the community, to be very open, to do interviews, to host parties, to attend parties, to talk to people, to just be a very social person. And until the day when I decided, okay, I'm moving to the United States, and I was still working in Europe, that was not really a requirement.
Sure.
And therefore, I would say that the fact that I'm working here in the United States for the most part opened actually my horizon. And yes, over time, I got more and more comfortable. Let us not forget, when I came to this country and took over the Oregon Symphony as music director, yes, I spoke English, but not the way I'm speaking English right now, by a very long shot.
Oh, is
but
that right? Okay.
I had one very, very little good tool. First of all, when I was a kid, and this is something maybe for all you students, if you have kind of a think going for languages, meaning you have a certain talent, please exploit it.
Yes.
It will be unbelievable way later in life, and you don't know where languages will bring you. And I always was very talented in languages. And on the other thing where I had something positive going is I was simply not afraid of speaking in a language that I was kind of, yes, familiar with, but yeah. So I remember that it was probably in the year 2002 at the end, or maybe 2003 at some point, where I did my very first talk at the Arlington Club in front of just an audience of 70. And after that, I thought to myself, wow, you just talked 25 minutes straight without stopping in a language that actually you didn't grow up with.
Sure.
And it seems to be that the people in the room either enjoyed it because I was funny, because I made mistakes, or they just thought, well, it's interesting, it's our new music director, let's check him out. Yeah. And of course, ever since, well, you hear me talking now, and I just talk and talk and talk and talk.
Yeah. Of course, your kids speak English as their first language, but do you speak to them in Spanish or German? Or?
My kids, these two kids,
yeah.
My two boys,
Luca and Claudio.
Luca and Claudio, who just turned 6 and 4.
Wow.
They speak English and German.
Okay. Yeah.
And I must say that it's a very interesting experience with my boys, because my boys actually speak not exactly grammatically correct German, because German is not an easy language. But they speak a lot of German. And the funny thing is, when I am present and I'm taking care of them, or I go with them to the park, they speak to each other in German.
Right. Okay.
And I did starting with Luca, who is the older one thing that I think is crucial if you really want your kid to learn a language that way, because I'm the only person, aside from my daughters, of course, but they live in Europe, who speaks German to them, is I do not speak a word of English to them.
Oh, you don't?
No, never.
Oh.
I address my kids, I speak strictly German, and that's it.
Is that hard? Because my daughter is almost 2 years old, and I have just the hardest time speaking to her in Spanish, because I'm so used to speaking English with my wife, and like my daily life is in English. It's hard for me. But how do you do it? Just German? That's amazing.
I would say yes. I don't know. It is pretty similar to this. If I can make an analogy again, it has nothing to do with food. If you ever travel to Great Britain or you travel to Australia, and you drive a car, everything is in the wrong side. Before you do that for the very first time, you think, and oh my God, I'm going to make a wrong turn and I'm going to crash, etc. And then, of course, the first week, it's, yes, you have to do a lot of thinking before you do. And also, you are sitting on the wrong side in the car because it's on the right side. But you know what? After a week, it gets more and more normal, and then you're like, oh, whatever. So in that sense, the same thing happens with language. Yes, at the beginning, I had to think and force myself, no, you do not speak English.
Yeah.
And then it just was natural, and now I don't even think about it. I just speak German.
So you gotta build a habit, basically.
Essentially, you build a habit, and this is a good habit. Your child benefits of it.
Very good. So Carlos, you've done so many interviews, and actually, let me ask you this. I'm kind of just going off my mental script here, but do you ever Google or look yourself up on YouTube? Do you ever go into YouTube and type your name, see what comes out?
I have done that because sometimes I wanted to see something that is on YouTube that I conducted.
Sure.
There are some videos of that. In terms of looking at my own interviews or something, hell no.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I'm one of those persons who actually is not even slightly interesting. Please don't show that to me because
No, I'm not gonna show you anything. But in preparing for this conversation, I did exactly that. I went on YouTube and I just typed your name, and of course, there are performances and there are excerpts of performances. But there's really fun stuff. There are actually some videos of you from the early 2000s guest conducting MYS rehearsals that maybe a parent posted. There's also a video of you doing, you probably remember this, the ALS ice bucket. What was it? Ice bucket challenge?
Yes, I remember that. I remember that.
That's there. That's on YouTube. So there are lots of fun things that, to me, kind of browsing, it really shows your what you have brought to the community in Portland. Not only on stage but also off stage, and with your pre-concert lectures and your visits to students. But in any case, I'm getting way off topic, because what I wanted to ask you is that so you do many interviews, and currently there is a series going on All Classical Portland called Commemorating Carlos. And it's an 8-part series with John Pittman highlighting performances by the Oregon Symphony. I think the most recent was Mahler 3. And so it's a spectacular series. And you have all these interviews and people ask you questions. And I want to ask you questions today that other people don't ask you, okay? And the first one is really very simple. We know a lot about your work, and your work with the Oregon Symphony and your work as music director in Europe. But we want to know more about Little Carlos.
Little Carlos.
Little Carlos. We were talking about Luca and Claudio. They're, talk to us about Little Carlos and how you even found music.
So Little Carlos, it just happens in life. This is the way it is, that if I can start by telling you a little bit about my two boys. I have two boys, Luca and Claudio. Claudio is the little one. Claudio is a real little troublemaker boy. And I wish, in a way, my mother would still be alive. Because I would ask her, because I'm not sure. So Little Carlos, I think I was like that.
Like Claudio.
I was a little handful. And I think what happened is, for my parents, who belonged to what I call the lowest part of middle class, the lowest.
Sure.
That's where I come from. My parents never had any money, and My parents always had one passion, which was going to concerts. Always, throughout their entire, luckily long life, concerts, operas, etc. And I was born in Montevideo in Uruguay, and of course there was a concert series, and our orchestra at that time when I was born, which is very long ago, was pretty good. And one way or the other, they took my brother and myself. My brother is 18 months older than myself, than me. They took us to a concert and they noticed that something was going on with me, not with him.
Sure.
And I remember that one time we just sat and they asked little me whether I want to learn an instrument. And I said, yeah. I mean, what the hell did I know? And then they asked, so what instrument do you want to learn? And I remember specifically that at that time, I only thought about two instruments that I really knew the names very well, which was piano and violin. And I choose one. I'm a violinist.
Yeah,
and that's the start. And then I started taking class, which I took until pretty much I was 14 years old. With a private professor who was a musician at the Orquesta del Sodre, which is the symphony orchestra of Montevideo.
Sure.
And I even remember one thing which, because later, when I was 15, the entire family moved to Vienna and I completed my studies in Vienna. First in violin, which I didn't finish, and then I switched, of course, to conducting, which I finished. I remember that in Vienna, one thing did not happen at all because it's not part of the menu in terms of what they teach you. But when I was a little kid, I studied solfège.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
See, I see you. You are a Latino too, and
Yes.
solfège. And I remember this la, sol, mi, re, do, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
I thought, of course, I thought it's annoying. Don't we all think it's annoying, solfège? But let me tell everybody who is annoyed by solfège, please study solfège.
It's so important. It's so useful.
It's so useful.
Yes.
Incredible. I tell you a different story in terms of not so little Carlos, that also it annoyed me to an extent that I cannot even explain. So here is the thing. At age 15, we transferred to Vienna. I started to go to high school in Vienna, which was okay. It was pretty similar with one exception in Vienna, because Vienna is very old school, at least it was at that time. You had to learn Latin. And of course I thought, guys, can you please leave me alone with your silly, unnecessary, stupid Latin, because I'm a native Spanish speaker. I don't need that. Thank you very much. And of course, nobody paid attention to learn Latin. Same deal. If you have an opportunity to learn a little bit about Latin, learn Latin.
Sure.
I don't think it's being offered at any high school here. I don't know that, but I must say that is another tool like solfège. That opens so many doors later, that makes you understand connections later. That's incredibly important.
So Latin is the solfège of language.
In a way, it is. And I tell you, because you asked about little Carlos, I also have to very proudly say that I was into sports, competitive.
You were?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So when I was ages between 8 and 10, 8 and a half and 10, which at that time it was a long time, I was the vice champion of Uruguay, meaning I was always number 2. There was always the same guy who always beat me at every race.
But what, you were like a track and field, or what do you do?
Sorry, swimming.
Swimming. Okay. Wow.
I was a competitive swimmer, age 8 and a half to 10. And at around 11, I switched to track and field. There I was the champion.
Nice. Wow.
I was the champion until I turned 13. And when you're 13, you have to move to the 13 to 15-year-old segment. And I, of course, had no chance, because between 13 and 15, it happens with many, many guys, girls too, you just grow.
Sure.
You couldn't compete with those 15-year-olds who were already 5'9" or bigger. I was very little when I was a kid, very tiny. And but I wanted to mention, if you think about little Carlos, sports.
Swimming and running. But also, I would assume 13 to 15, you were getting pretty serious about music. Because at 15, you went to Vienna to study music. So did both of those things compete with one another? Or?
No, I managed.
You did?
I managed.
Okay.
See, I would say I managed. You know, in hindsight, one thing that maybe it's just so different for you students and for everybody who is now here important and looks at this and thinks, okay, what is the relationship between kids, ages 12, 9, 16, 17, to music and to orchestral and to just their instrument? And it's, I think, a very natural. I remember very well that being a violinist, I was 1 out of 2 in my entire school, high school, 1 out of 2. During my entire time at school, meaning during 10 years.
Sure.
Easily. There were 2 people. Interesting enough, detail, ironic detail, those 2 were in the same class, are very, very close friends since the age of 4 until this day, and both are conductors. It's a very strange story, but that is the truth. My buddy, Nicolas, and I, we were in the same classroom until I moved to Europe, and we both became conductors. He's a conducting teacher, and I'm a conductor. But that's a detail.
Very cool.
But that's a funny thing. But in terms of whether it was natural and when did I get serious about music? I cannot answer that, because the truth is I just simply I am one of those strange humans who never thought about something else.
Sure.
Seriously, never.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought, well, it's going to be music. Never mind that I might not have had a clear idea of how to get there.
Uh-huh.
But essentially, it's going to be music, and that's the end of the story. And then I moved to Vienna, and I started to study at the Conservatory for Music in Vienna, and later at the university. And then I switched to conducting, and that is an entire different story.
Sure.
But I cannot pinpoint like, oh, this happened to me. For me, it was always, as long as I can think, it's going to be music.
Mm. Were you naturally attracted to practicing? Were you a good practicer, if that's a word?
Hell no. Oh, God in heaven.
So it took an extra effort to kind of like start like practice. Because I know I have students who are, like they love to practice, and others that it takes an effort to just, get yourself to, doing it and then, practice.
I mean, yes, I practiced, but in terms of being one of those committed kids who actually adores to practice and adores this activity of just grinding your teeth into something, as I said, no, not at all. I always like to say that, and this has nothing to do with music, it just has to do with life, that there comes a time in our life where we realize in order to get from A to B in our life, you have to work.
Sure.
Now, if you translate that to music, you see sometimes and you realize you are actually a talented human being in that field. And yes, I am aware I was a very talented kid in music. But it took me years to realize, talented is just this much of a fraction in terms of what you can and what you should accomplish, and you have to put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I think, so when did I really get serious about what you have to invest? It's anywhere between ages, I would say 15, 16 until I turned 30.
Sure.
Something like that.
Yeah. So basically when you went to Vienna then and you started digging
Well,
deeper. And
the thing is, going to Vienna, all of a sudden, you're not the only one.
huh,
You're all of a sudden, there are so many classes. I went to high school, and we had, of course, our own orchestra, and everybody in this high school where I went to has to be a student at the conservatory or at the university. It's a school especially for music students.
yes.
But I was surrounded by so much talent, and I was, of course, surrounded by several violinists who ate me for breakfast and didn't notice. It's reality.
So maybe your swimming and track and field competitiveness came, after you there.
Yeah, of course it came, but it didn't come hand in hand with the fact that, okay, if you want to be competitive, you just need to put your 4 or 5 hours per day in. I practiced more, and it was a different environment, and being at the conservatory and playing for a more demanding teacher meant something.
Sure.
And I played okay, long time ago.
Yeah. You still play at all? Do you ever get your violin out and play?
God forbid, no.
No, okay. All right.
Oh, no, because so this is a reality that it's just the way it is. If you stop practicing your instrument, you will realize it after probably a short period of time.
Yeah.
And then you can come back. But if you stop practicing something like, roughly speaking, 35 years ago, then when you pick up the violin, and yes, I have done that, you just get so frustrated with yourself because you actually know how it goes.
You know how it should sound.
But you can't do it anymore. This today, why doesn't it work?
Yeah, oh, yeah. How did you start to become interested in conducting?
Well, at age 17, while still in high school, the conductor of our high school was also the director of the school, and he just didn't have any interest in rehearsing. He just didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to do the work. So there appeared first one, then another one, students who did the rehearsal for them. And one day I went to him, the director, and said, "Hey, I want to conduct too." And I don't know what went on, but he said, "Yes, okay, you take the next week's rehearsal." And from that day on, for the next 1 year and a half, I did all the rehearsals.
Wow.
Without any kind of training. And I have to add one little thing to this, which is I am very aware that at age 16 or something, I was that type of personality, meaning always very opinionated and always telling everybody else how to do it. I thought like, well, it's a born conductor, always likes to tell everybody what to do.
Yeah. So no, you never had a conducting lesson before that. You started rehearsing. I guess you just knew from like playing in the orchestra how to beat a pattern and how to like hold a fermata and that type of stuff.
I think so.
This kind of came naturally. Yeah.
I mean, yes, you have to have a very. It's just a blessing that you know what to do with your hands, so that you don't confuse everybody. And of course, I think it was age 19 or 20, that I really started to study conducting.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my teachers, the two I had until I graduated, it was not so much technical work they didn't need to do. I mean, some things, but not the basics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but I mean, it obviously led to an incredibly successful career, but early on also it led to winning a conducting competition.
Oh, yeah, that.
What's
that? Yeah, it was in the Hans Swarovski International Conducting Competition, which at that time probably was one of the biggest you can have in the world. And
how old were you when you won that?
26.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
26.
Sure.
I think. Yeah, must be 26. yeah,
Mi- mi-
1984. So, and yeah, the first prize in that year was divided between my colleague, Japanese colleague by the name of Ken Takaseki, and myself.
Yeah.
And that was a really great thing. And it was, I mean, yeah, you know, it was a time of big, big illusions, and none of them really happened.
What do you mean? What do you mean illusions? Like,
Well, you know, when you're a student and you just you do what you do, and here and there you get to conduct a little bit of orchestra, and you realize that that is something that you might be able to do. Let's just put it that way.
sure, sure.
And then you read about competitions, and you think, well, maybe I should go to this or to that competition just to see what's going to happen. And then I enlisted, if you will, to this huge competition where they said there is a little bit of money involved if you win it, and mainly there are maybe agents are going to be interested in you, and you will get some concerts
Sure.
out of that because orchestras will go in to invite you. And then I win this thing together with Ken, and what happened? Nothing. No agency was interested, and also no concerts were offered to neither of us, and that was the end of the story. So essentially, the organization of the entire thing essentially didn't do anything for us.
Sure,
so
sure.
I had to go the difficult route of finding myself an agent, which was a tough one.
Mm.
It was tough. But then eventually I found one. We stayed together for quite a period of time until he retired. And he helped me get my very first job.
Nice, nice. I mean, I guess I would say that nothing happened immediately after that competition, but all these things sort of accumulate, right? I mean, accomplishments, and it's like little stepping stones in a way.
I would say I had two stepping stones that one I know for a fact, the second, I think that is what it was. So this was 1984. I don't recall in which year. I think it was 1987-ish or something. So fast forward.
Yeah.
In Vienna, there was a concert with the Vienna Symphony Orchestra, where the day before the dress rehearsal, the great conductor Christoph von Dochnany canceled.
Yes. Ooh.
The day before the dress rehearsal. And the director of the concert hall had been in my competition as a judge and remembered me and said, let's call Carlos and see whether and how. So I did my concert with the Vienna Symphony Orchestra with, at that time, two extremely famous soloists playing the flute and harp concerto by Mozart. And I remember it was also Schubert Symphony No. 4 and some other piece that I have no idea. Another thing where I think it had something to do either with that concert or maybe with a competition is one day, I think 88, roughly speaking, 1988, I get a call. And the call was about the Opera House in Zurich. And they told me, can you please take over a magic flute? One thing, magic flute, December 26th, by the way, because our main conductor, Nikolaus Harnoncourt, cannot do it.
Wow, okay.
And I went and I did one rehearsal with all the singers. Just here we do this, here we do that, here we do that, here we do that. I had done, I think, one or two magic flutes before, not much. And then off you go, and in the evening, you just get in front of an orchestra that you have never, ever seen, and you just conduct and you pray that nothing goes wrong, and it went well. What I didn't know at that time is that the Opera House in Zurich was looking for a conductor
Yeah.
to replace Nicolas Harnoncourt when Harnoncourt was unavailable. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He told me, take over this magic flute. It's, yeah. So in history, I'm just telling you a little bit of history of, first of all, this opera house, and second, myself. The opera house in Zurich at that time was extraordinarily famous because of one thing, which was a lot of productions between Nicolas Harnoncourt as a conductor and the stage director Jean-Pierre Ponel on the other side. These two worked together on, I think, 6 different operas, maybe 7 or 8. It was either Monteverdi or mainly Mozart. There was a Magic Flute, a Don Giovanni, Abduction from Serail, Figaro's Marriage of Figaro. All of that were Jean-Pierre Ponel Harnoncourt. Now, when you know a little bit about Nicolas Harnoncourt, which I do, you know, just watch out, because it's very peculiar in interpretation.
Sure,
and
sure.
there are a lot of things there. So if you take over something from Nicky, you just look at the video of what he's doing, because otherwise you're going to be dead on arrival.
Right.
You're going to step into one of those holes and one of those liberties that he takes. And I did all of that. And from that year on, for I think it was 2 years or so, I conducted every time that Harnoncourt was not on the podium, I was there. Conducted quite an amount.
Wow.
And I conducted, it never came to a Don Giovanni, but everything else. And I also conducted Titus, which was not by Ponel, it was by somebody else.
Did you spend a lot of time with him, or was it just basically you were there when he's not there?
Okay, the arrangement was essentially, I watch a video of him conducting, because he was not around.
Yeah.
Let's remember that Harnoncourt actually lived near Salzburg. He didn't live in Zurich, he lived near Salzburg. And anyway, but one day I had to step, it was kind of short, I don't remember what was the reason, but I had a long meeting with Harnoncourt, with him personally, when we went over Marriage of Figaro.
Yeah, wow.
He was with his score, I was his score, and he told me, hear this, hear that, hear that, hear that. And occasionally I said, and what do you do here? And what do you, because of course I studied the score and I knew, and I must say 2 things that I still cherish until this day. Harnoncourt was one of the most influential conductors of the last 30 years, easily.
Yes.
And in terms of interpretation of classical music in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he, of course, during his last 20 years of his life, worked with every orchestra in Europe that is famous, mainly Vienna Philharmonic, Vienna and Berlin Philharmonic. He worked quite a bit with them, aside from his own ensemble, the Concertus Musicus. Nonetheless, so he told me everything that I need to know about Marriage of Figaro, and then he closed his score and said, you know, I now told you pretty much a lot of things that I do, but you know what? You go and do your thing. And I, wow. Because I understood it not only like, hey, you are a different person than I am, so do your thing. I understood it as a vote of confidence.
Sure, yeah, that's
confident that you will find a good balance between what I tell you should be done and just go find it.
Wow.
And that was, and over time, of course, I found more things that were, I would say, more appropriate for me.
Sure.
But trust me, it's still to this day one of my most cherished times in life is my 2 years, 2.5 that was in Zurich Opera House. First of all, because the production that Harnoncourt there were absolutely an example. They were an example to everybody. You got goosebumps. And you got the goosebumps not only because certain musical things that happened and that you did, was also because of the staging. I can tell you things, I can tell you, but it's kind of me. I can tell you a story about every time I conducted that piece. And after the first time I looked forward to it, I knew that when something will happen on the stage right at the beginning, the entire audience of the full opera house in Zurich will go like, wow.
Wow, cool.
Just the first picture you get. Because, so this is, I mean, I tell you because we are just chatting. Abduction of the Serail by Mozart.
Yes.
For whoever doesn't know, it's essentially the story about this Muslim ruler, if we call him, who abducts a very pretty woman and wants to marry her because he loves her, but she loves somebody else, and blah, 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 blah.
Typical opera affair.
Yeah, it's an opera affair. Now, in this staging was very particular because it was not simply what I just told you, it was kind of a story within a story. So everything that I just told you was essentially staged by somebody else. So you have to imagine this. The Opera House in Zurich, curtains are closed. Orchestra tunes, silence. I come out. I bow to the audience. And we are, by the way, in that opera, we are seated at level, not in the pit, at level floor.
Sure.
I turn around. The entire thing goes dark. You can't see a damn thing, but you hear the curtain opening. And then you see through bluish light, you see the entire stage full of people, all with wigs in the Mozart style.
Yes.
And in the middle, on a very big chair, you distinguish the king. And that is how it's, and every time I heard the audience with this first picture, we see everything full of people seated, and in the middle, in the middle of is the king. And it's very clear, he doesn't have a crown, but it's clearly, he's the guy who rules.
Sure.
And he just looks at the audience, and then he looks at me and does this gesture. And then I start the overture.
Nice.
That was always, I looked so much forward to that moment.
Wow.
And I conducted it. So in a way, you don't need to know the opera, but the fact that, and of course it was that he, the king, stages the abduction of Serail, and he himself plays this Muslim ruler, and blah, 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 and the rest is history. But I tell you.
You know, I guess this is somewhat related to this, but at the same time, kind of moving away from the topic, is that I find that young musicians often, mainly the ones that are really kind of serious about it, they deprive themselves from other art forms like theater, like dance, like visual arts. And when you describe this opera and the staging and the set design, there's so much that goes into it. And I'd like to recommend that young musicians not only learn about music, but also learn about literature, like read as much as you can, go to a museum, go, just to a theater, a play. Of course, my wife is a theater actor, and some of my most powerful experiences as an audience member have been in a watching a play or going to an opera and just being kind of like taken away by the set design so it sounds like you lived in that world.
Well, first, I can only second what you just said. It's absolutely crucial that you have more knowledge than only music, and that if you have a little bit of information and you have read. For me, this is kind of like stating the very obvious. Because where would we be if we know a lot about our field? Meaning we know a lot about Mr. Mozart and Mr. Beethoven, and Mr. Gershwin and all of those, which is a fantastic thing, and you can dedicate a lifetime to that. If you would have no knowledge about Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Toni Morrison, and to name a few, and you would have never seen a Shakespeare play in the theater, and you have never visited a museum and seen a Van Gogh in real life. And the other thing I want to add to what you just said is, maybe nobody thinks about it, but we musicians are very particular people in the sense of if we want to become professional musicians, we have to dedicate our life to this from a very early stage onwards. And of course, everybody, Raúl, Carlos, and probably everybody else whom you've seen here will tell you, hey guys, work hard. Don't forget to work hard and practice. And yes, I'm sure that, okay, students, kids, listen. Yes, that's all true. Don't forget it. But please have a life. It's important. Have a life. Yeah. Play. Yes. Do other things. It's important because in terms of what you will be able later to express in music, the richer your being is, the richer the outcome is going to be.
Yes. Yeah. That and it sort of, to me, I see it like it fills your soul, and it gives your art more substance. I don't know. It's not a shell, but it's filled with life and with truth, right?
Absolutely, and you make correlations between things, and I mean, it's not that you have to be like a book of knowledge.
Right.
I mean, I don't consider myself a book of knowledge by any means, but I read, I adore visiting museums if I can, and just to consume things other than music.
Yeah.
There is, what I'm saying is, for me, it's a given that we have dedicated our life to this. It's a given. I always say there is life besides music. Don't forget it.
Yeah. Well, and Carlos, as we get close to the end of our time together, I think this is a great transition to our last segment that we do on the MYS Virtual Hangout that we call Sound Advice. And my question for you is the following. If you, Carlos Kalmar, could travel back in time, and we were talking about little Carlos earlier, right? But if you could travel back in time and, let's say, find not so little Carlos, high school age Carlos, what advice would you have for him?
It's actually very simple. It's not even, I wouldn't even consider it very interesting. My advice would have been, little Carlos, understand that talent is not much. It's, how much is talent? 15 to 20% of what you do. Understand it. Do not rely so much on talent. Yes, you are talented. So are all the others.
Sure.
And even if you're very talented, whatever. So my advice would be, work a little harder. Don't be so lazy. Because I'm always very open to admit I was lazy.
Sure.
At that high school age, because, well, you have, I mean, yeah, everybody understands me. You have other things in mind.
Yeah.
And it's not so much, the reason why I would have said that to myself if I could travel back in time is that maybe later, a little more opportunities, other opportunities would have opened. It's
Sure.
not for me so much about the fact that I think I could have had a bigger career, because that is for me completely pointless to even think about it. What the way you work is the way you work.
Yeah.
And I don't think that people are more admirable if they are very high up in the ladder. For me, in a certain way, a conductor of a very renowned orchestra and teacher who actually makes it exciting for a lot of students in his high school in regards to music, they are not the same, but their effort might be similar.
Sure.
But I just think that the more you work when you are a little bit younger, without forgetting to have a life,
Yes, yes.
the richer you will be later. Because one thing I can tell you about later is it just gets a little harder.
Yeah.
That's all there is. And I see that because I have children, and children are like sponges. And it's kind of amazing. They do this.
It's
and
incredible.
Then they have something is in their head. And I've seen that because I also have two daughters who are adults in the meantime. That, God, what they learned when they were in high school in terms of just this sponge. And later, when you are over 48, you're 55, yes, you still do that, but it's a little tougher to kind of get it into your head.
Yeah.
And that is why a little Carlos. Oh, yeah.
Very good. Well, Carlos Kalmar, you've been so generous with your time. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
It's such fun with you.
Congratulations on, closing this chapter with the Oregon Symphony. We're such huge fans of you and your work. And we will be, paying attention to what you're doing, whatever that is. And I wish you a wonderful end of this very unusual season.
Yeah, I can only second that and wish every student and every parent and the friends of parents and the friends of the students, please, let's work together so that we all can come back.
Yes.
We can actually see each other, which we are, I'm sure, all longing to do. And we can resume on what we want to do best, which is get together with Raúl and MYS and see each other again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carlos. Best to your family, and we'll see you hopefully in person soon.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you to Carlos Kalmar and the Oregon Symphony, and I hope that you will join me for the next MYS Virtual Hangout. We're going to be doing these just about every other week with more extraordinary artists sharing their life stories and advice for our young musicians. See you next time.